What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamoda and my good friend Danny Abdeljabbar. Happy New Year, man. How are you?
Happy New Year. Chilling, man. As per usual. How about yourself?
Doing pretty well. I can't really complain. I'm glad we're doing a historical podcast on a day where nothing at all politically is happening.
Nothing that I can think of.
A very slow period politically. Right now it's about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, the 5th or the 6th?
January 6th.
January 6th. There's absolutely nothing going on politically as we record this podcast right now. So I guess that means there's nothing to really talk about going on in a political landscape. So we can just skip right ahead and talk about what we were planning.
Well, actually, there is one thing that I can bring up, and that is that it looks like Kim Kardashian is getting a divorce from Kanye West. Yeah.
Shut the front door.
Yep. So that's a thing.
I don't know where that came from, that phrase.
The front door.
Shut the front door. But yeah, so the responses that we've been getting from our history podcasts lately, and I guess you guys should be expecting history podcasts since the name of this podcast is called Bro History. We kind of mix and match. We do some political stuff. We do foreign policy stuff. And lately we've been trying to focus a little bit more on the historical podcast. I know
specifically
a lot of you guys,
the ancient world, right?
Specifically the ancient world, mainly because when doing research and preparing episodes, you get stuck in these rabbit holes. So you'll find the topic, and you'll be like, oh, well, you know what else would be an interesting topic? And then you kind of build from there. That's how you learn more, and that's how we try to put on the show. So we're going to continue to do these episodes on ancient history. Obviously not going to be doing it forever. However, it'll probably be a recurring theme for now on. Mm-hmm. Just because I've really enjoyed doing these over the past 2 months. And
the responses have been great, Yeah. We can see that with the download numbers. We can see that with the reviews that we've been getting, which, by the way, thank you very much. I think we just hit 400 reviews very recently, so that's really awesome. Keep that going. But yeah, we'll keep rocking with this for a while until we either get bored or you tell us to stop.
And right now, I think people are getting a little mentally ill in the political landscape. Mm-hmm. And I honestly am not eager to become one of the mentally ill, so I'm tuning out. Yep. I'm waiting until, at the very least, until the inauguration to start following politics again, because it's a bit cheeky out there. Maybe we'll discuss it at the end of the show if we have time.
Well, there's nothing to discuss, as you said in the beginning.
Oh yeah, there's nothing to discuss what's going on. There's absolutely nothing. There is nothing going on. But yeah, our last episode, we left off with the Assyrian Empire. And if you missed last episode, they were the regional hegemon in the Near East from the 10th century to the 7th century. Mm-hmm. And in addition to being a world power, the Assyrians were bastards, total bastards. So they had a highly sophisticated military and were absolutely brutal to the people who they conquered. And they forged a massive empire with hundreds of different ethno-linguistic groups. They hold this empire together by using terror as a political weapon. Right. So, for example, the Assyrians, if some city staged a rebellion, the Assyrian army would show up, slaughter a bunch of people, and in some cases, they would exterminate the population. They would take out the leadership of the city, and then they would publicly torture the leadership in front of people. Yeah.
And in addition to that, I think if we started seeing the national identity of one of their subjects getting too strong, or there was too many insurrections happening from one particular group of people, they would go ahead and besiege that city and deport everybody and basically spread out the rest of the population of that one city or that one ethnic group to a bunch of different parts of their empire.
Yeah, and these tactics worked for hundreds of years until it backfired on them. In 626 BC, they had a civil war over the line of succession, and it leads to the subject states seizing the opportunity to oust them as their imperial rulers. And an alliance forms, mainly between the Medes and the Babylonians, and they destroyed Assyria, and they burned down their capital Ashur, and their largest city, Nineveh. So these cities are basically wiped off the map. And where we were getting at last episode is that with the destruction of Nineveh at that time in the 7th century BC had a population of like maybe 200,000 people, like maybe 500,000 people. We don't really know because that's how utterly destroyed it was.
Yeah.
We don't know, but we do know that it was a thriving metropolis that was taken away by the old world. And now what we're trying to do is we're trying to link the old world of the Near East to the Western world, if that's possible.
Right.
And
or at least the infancy of the Western world.
The infancy of the Western world. And we're doing this. There's a huge problem with this, though. And here's the challenge. We're relying on the ancient historians.
Mm-hmm.
And the ancient historians that we're using are the ones from Greece. We're dealing with highly biased historians. And that's a major problem when it comes to ancient sources, is that they're trying to promote the morality of that current society and promulgate the values of and create some type of national identity. That comes out in a lot of their writing. Mm-hmm. I mean, even to this day, people think that Homer was a person.
Homer Simpson?
Homer who wrote about the Iliad.
Oh yeah,
it didn't write anything. It was an oral story that was told down over and over again. And Homer was more like a brand than an actual guy.
Right. And to that point, I think, we also, especially in the case of the Assyrians, for a long time, we rely on religious texts, which, are also of questionable historical accuracy. For a while, we weren't exactly sure if the Assyrians were real or not until we started digging stuff up and doing like archaeology. So, when we blend both historians with an agenda that often are more concerned with making a cool story than, with actually telling the cold, hard facts on the ground. And we also take into consideration some of the ancillary texts, things like, biblical and oral traditions. It makes it a little bit difficult to figure this out entirely. So, heavy asterisks on a lot of this stuff we're about to talk about because, who knows?
Who knows? Even the best historians or the most accomplished historians don't really know. But we're going to try to bring this into the direction of the inventor of the historian profession, Herodotus. Mm-hmm. And he tells a story of the Greco-Persian Wars. So we're going to try best to paraphrase basically his writings and his narrative, and then poke holes as we go through to some of his exaggerations. Right. Because I think most people, what they think of is they think of the movie 300.
Yeah,
which was a great movie, which was an entertaining, fun movie to watch, but
I liked it.
It's a very enjoyable, entertaining film. However, that's ridiculous. Like, that's not historically what was probably close to what actually happened there. Let's move forward. So, the reason why we bring out the Assyrian Empire is because they created the political structures that let new empires take its place. After the fall of Nineveh in 612 BC, you have three major players in this region. So you have the Chaldeans, the Neo-Babylonians, who dominate Mesopotamia, so central and southern Iraq. You have the Lydians, who were in Asia Minor, so modern-day Turkey. And then you also have the Medes. And the Medes are located in most of modern-day Iran and northern Iraq.
Totally. And I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the Chaldeans because they have a special place in our podcast. A little while ago when we were covering the elections, we went to Trump's website to see all the people, all the coalitions of people that we had. And among many of them that we all thought were ancient and long since dead civilizations, the Chaldeans were one of them. They're also known as the Neo-Babylonians. They, as you pointed out, Henry, dominated Mesopotamia. They were the last of the Mesopotamian empires to be ruled by monarchs that were native to Mesopotamia. And this was a huge comeback for Babylon, quote unquote. They hadn't been in charge, at least Mesopotamian peoples, hadn't been in charge for like 1,000 years. And there was a huge population growth and resurgence of Babylonian culture and art and architecture that sprung up in this period. And the empire kind of ended up getting a really bad rap, as you pointed out. So they end up conquering Palestine, or Israel, Palestine, and Egypt, parts of Egypt at least. And in the Hebrew Bible, we learned that they end up taking Jews as captives. So the kind of short story about that one, we got to talk about Nebuchadnezzar II, who ends up crushing Jerusalem and putting all the Jewish people in captivity. So the short version of the story is that the Chaldean, or the Neo-Babylonian Empire, they take over all the areas that we were just covering in the last few episodes. So Mesopotamia, the Levant, parts of the Sinai Peninsula, etc. And basically to prevent, Jerusalem from being destroyed, the current king at the time, I'm going to butcher this one, Jehoiakim of Judah, of the kingdom of Judah, he basically switched sides from Egypt to Babylon. They were originally allied with Egypt, and now they switched over to Babylon, knowing that Nebuchadnezzar was crazy. And then in like 601, Nebuchadnezzar basically unsuccessfully attempted to invade Egypt and got spanked, and got pushed back, suffered heavy losses. And that failure basically led to a bunch of rebellions in the Levant, including King Jehoiakim from Judah that we just talked about, who ended up he just stopped paying him tribute. So he stopped giving him money. And so Nebuchadnezzar got pissed, turned back around, laid siege to Jerusalem. That eventually fell in 597, but it was like a soft fall. So Nebs, who I'm going to call him as Nebs from now on, he basically installs Jehoiakim's nephew Zedekiah as the king, and dude was just 21 years old, which is crazy. But Zedekiah ends up flipping sides also, so he goes back to Egypt too. At this point, Nebs is super pissed, and he besieges Jerusalem again. The second siege was basically the last one that Babylon did, that the Neo-Babylonian Empire did. They totally razed Jerusalem, and the Temple of Solomon was destroyed. And as the Hebrew Bible will tell you, they spread out the tribes all across the lands at that point. Very interesting story, and an interesting empire that maybe in a future state we'll cover. I think Nebs here is an interesting kind of point to this story.
Yeah, and it wasn't until Cyrus the Great of Persia, which we're going to get into, actually frees him and says, you got to let the Jews go home. Mm-hmm. In addition to the Neo-Babylonians, though, the other major power was Lydians. So the Lydians, they're up in Turkey, or Asia Minor, Anatolia. And what's interesting, in like libertarians or anyone who's interested in economics, or especially Austrian economics, they're the first to coin money. So Mises, his most famous contribution to economics, or at least one of his most famous contributions, was his regression theorem, which demonstrated that initially money must have been a commodity. It couldn't be something that was created by fiat, by the state. It had to be something that people already valued. We see through most of history up until the 20th century, at least, every money that a society used was some type of commodity. And usually over time, that society would gravitate towards precious metals, mainly because precious metals are scarce and they're portable and they're easily divisible. So they have the characteristics that make good money. So the Lydians, they were the first to take the precious metals and then stamp them with some type of official seal that would reduce the transaction cost in commerce. Because if you have an emblem or a seal that people recognize or trust, people will say, okay, I know that this coin is made out of real metal, and it's not a counterfeit.
Right.
And they were an incredibly wealthy empire. In addition to those, you have the Medes. They controlled the land that connected East and West Asia. So they dominated modern day Iran and then northern Iraq and parts of Western Turkey. in southern Iran, there were small Persian kingdoms, and a lot of people kind of brush off the Persians as just smaller players on the world stage. But that all changes with Cyrus the Great.
Right.
Cyrus the Great, he revolts against the Medes, and he wins. And not only does he win, but he takes over their central government. And in doing so, he inherits the wars that the Medes were already having with the Lydians. So Crassus, the king of Lydia, he started annexing territory from the Medes when they figured out that they were losing the war to Cyrus. Therefore, when Cyrus actually takes control of the central government, he tries to preserve the new empire. So he marches on Crassus. You've heard of the term "Richus Crassus"?
Yeah, totally. That's where that comes from, right?
That's where it comes from. So this is where you get the story about. It's like a famous story that Crassus gets a message from the Oracle Delphi saying, if you go to war with Cyrus, she means you will destroy a great empire. But he took the meaning is that, okay, like it looks like I got the green light from the Oracle. She says I'm going to win. I'm going to destroy this great empire. But it actually meant that he would destroy his own empire. Dun, dun, dun. So it was like an M. Night Shyamalan twist.
Side note on that, wasn't the Oracle just like high on like gases from the cave that she chilled in? Wasn't that the story about that? She was just high all the time?
Or she was just making shit up.
Or both.
She's just super, super high.
And making shit up.
or maybe she was an actual oracle.
Or maybe aliens.
Right. You can see like, yeah, you'll definitely win. You'll destroy that great empire. And then when she's wrong, she's like, and the great empire was you. Like I didn't. Yeah, exactly. She just tries to take it back.
Right.
So when Cyrus conquered Lydia, what he inherits are the Greek colonies that were in Turkey.
Right. And you might not know about this, but there were a ton of colonies in that area, and the Greeks were pretty good at colonizing, but not like how you would think of like French or English, carving up Africa. See, Greece was
not scrambling for their political pursuits.
Well, maybe a little bit, but just
we're bringing civilization to these savages.
It was a little different. I mean, I think the motivations were similar. Greece was super mountainous, and it didn't have like a lot of land available for farming. And as a result, a lot of city-states would sponsor the creation of these colonies outside of the Greek mainland that they would then populate with a bunch of Greeks. And in turn, they would just be, allied with one of these major city-states. They would basically be independent, and they would be run on their own. But they would pay some dues, some homage, if you will. And they would set up really good trading situations with the city-state. So it was like colonizing light. Right. And that's where these city-states in Asia Minor pop up. Right. So Ionia was one of them, one of the important ones. But we have a bunch of them kind of dotted on the coastline there of the Asia Minor. And those were absorbed into the Lydian Empire. And so when the Persians and Cyrus dominated the Lydians, they also inherited, those Greek city-states.
Yeah, exactly. And Cyrus, a lot of his campaigns when he was king of kings were wars that he inherited from previous empires, but also a lot of his wars were just putting down rebellions because there was a lot of parts of the empire that was trying to break off when he was king.
It happens when you expand your empire super quickly,
That's what happens. And one of the main reasons why he's able to create this empire is because a lot of the structures were already in place from back when the Assyrians existed.
Right.
So that's how that was. Even the Assyrians made it possible for someone like Cyrus. And just a quick note: the Persian Empire was not like the Assyrian Empire.
Right. The Achaemenids viewed themselves as enlightened rulers because they allowed religious freedom and they supported people's rights. even the ones that they had conquered previously. So they were very woke for their time. I think you could easily say.
Yeah, and Cyrus eventually dies on campaign.
What was the story Herodotus told about this?
So yeah, this comes from Herodotus. So he dies fighting in Central Asia against some Amazon woman. And
so Wonder Woman.
I forget the exact story, but it's like not an Amazon woman, but it's some female leader of this Scythian tribe. Mm-hmm. And he tries to marry her, and she's like insulted about being seen as some type of like political pawn, mm-hmm. and she ends up going to war with him, and she kills him on the battlefield. It's something very poetic, and mm-hmm. It doesn't sound like it actually happened. He could have just died in his bedroom, as far as we know. But that's a story that people go with. He died in this kind of weird.
He died fighting Wonder Woman. I got it.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
He died fighting Wonder Woman. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So after he dies, his son Cambyses becomes king, and he further expands the empire over to Egypt. And allegedly, he's assassinated. Allegedly, I use it quote unquote because there's a lot of different stories. So again, we don't really know what's true, but his assassination story is incredibly bizarre and weird, and it's too long to get into. But essentially, Darius, the king who comes in after him, Darius, you can call him Darius or Darius. He claims that Cambyses is an imposter, that his brother, he's a fake king, and he stages a coup against the fake king Cambyses because he had actually killed the real Cambyses, but it's probably not true. He probably just made that up.
A lot of this is probably made up.
A lot of this is probably made up.
Yeah.
But Darius, he takes the Persian empires to a new height when the successor, Darius the First, Darius the Great. So he expands the empire into Cyrene, which is Libya, into the Caucasus, so Georgia and Azerbaijan, and then Indus, India and Pakistan, and then the areas of Scythia, in the areas of the north of the Black Sea. Mm-hmm. And something important to note that is going to set this campaign against the Greeks up. On his campaigns in Scythia, it involved sending an army around the western Black Sea to strike at the Scythians at the rear. And during this campaign, the Persians end up seizing parts in mainland Europe. So Thrace, which is modern-day Bulgaria, and then Macedon, and they make it a client state. Now, the question is, where does the Greco-Persian War start? Like, how does this relate to it?
Yep. So I think just to quickly surmise the differences between the Greeks and the Persians, because I think it's super important. The Achaemenid dynasty, the Persians, they ruled this particular area, in all of Mesopotamia and all the places that we had been talking about for these last couple of episodes. And as I pointed out before, they saw themselves as an enlightened rulership. They allowed a lot of religious freedom, but they were an empire, a unified state. And that's starkly contrasted with the Greeks, who at this time were not a unified people. They weren't one thing. We're loosely calling them Greeks now because that's it's easier to think of them that way. But I think a lot of these people had more allegiances to their city states than they did to, like, say, an ethnicity, like being Greek. I think each of them had their own systems of government. Many of them were the precursors to the democracies that we see today, and they controlled not only the city itself but also the surrounding farmland. And these city states often had rivalries against one another, even fighting each other, right? And the most powerful of those two were Sparta and Athens, which we're definitely going to talk a lot about. But they were major rivals, and in that era, I think like I said, their primary loyalty, the Greek primary loyalty, is that of their city-state, whoever they're a citizen of, which is like very, very different from the Persian style, right? And kind of a far departure from a lot of the things that we had been talking about previously. And I think basically that's good setup for what was happening. And by 499 BC, the Greek city-states, that were in Turkey, in Asia Minor, like we were saying, when they were staging those revolts against the Greek rulers that were appointed by the Persians to run those cities, and the Persian Empire came down on them like a fucking truck, right? They came down to crush the rebellions. Specifically, the Ionian Greeks were one of the ones that were kind of acting up during this time, and they ended up calling back to their homies in the mainland Greek. Remember back when I was saying how the Greeks would set up their systems of colonization? So the Ionians were really, really closely tied to Athens and I think also Eritrea. But during this time, pretty much everybody refused to help them, which was kind of sad, except for Athens and Eritrea. And both of them ended up sending ships and money and a bunch of other stuff. But the rebellion ended up pretty badly for the Ionians. It goes on for a couple of years. And then eventually the Persians end up losing their foothold in Macedon and in Thrace. I think it took 5 years total for Darius and the Persians to regain complete control of the region. And once it was all settled, King Darius, he decided he wanted to punish Athens and Eritrea. Why? Because, if he felt like if he didn't, that, well, they would do it again, that they would offer the Ionians and the rest of the Greek city-states support again to revolt and rebel. Or at least that's one of the stories that had been told. I know there's a few others as well.
It's most likely a pretext just to incorporate Greece into the empire.
Right. Like more Greeks expansion.
They're a threat to our imperial hegemony. We need to put an end to this immediately. That's what it most likely is.
It's all geopolitical, I think both are probably true in their own respect, and they can't just leave them alone because they did help support a rebellion, and at the same time they probably also wanted to conquer more land, just because that's an empire.
Well, the campaign that they tell that they plan kind of shows their cards a little bit. So the Persians, in response. So the war ends. The Ionian revolt ends in 493 BC. So it lasts like about 5 years or so, and it's really bad. A lot of these city-states are just leveled, but a lot of them are actually given. They're granted their pardons. Where the Greeks, they were rebelling because they hated the Greek tyrant system, where they'd have these brutal guys who would just. There was no type of democracy or governmental structure in place.
And nothing they were used to. Right.
Wanted those back, and they were actually granted that in a lot of cases. The cities that were causing the most trouble were leveled, but other cities that were fighting against them were granted clemency. But the campaign that the Persians plan is that they want to reclaim their lost territory in Europe, in mainland Europe that they lost, meaning that their army was going to go north over the Dardanelles Strait, which would allow them to resecure Thrace and Macedonia,
right?
Or Macedonia. You can pronounce it either way.
Macedonia.
I pronounce it Macedonia, but more people get upset when I say Macedonia than Macedonia, so I changed, even though Macedonia is the correct way.
One of the accepted ways, you mean?
One of the accepted ways. So in 492 BC, the Persian general Mardonius, he sweeps around the coast, and then he secures the Aegean Islands, and then he resubjugates Thrace, and then he turns Macedon back into a vassal state. All things were going really well during this campaign until there was a humongous storm around Mount Athos.
Damn you, Poseidon.
He causes a storm, and he destroys the Persian fleet.
Right.
So kind of like the Japanese kamikaze that destroyed the Mongolian fleet on their way to when when the Mongolian were trying to incorporate Japan.
Right. This is the OG kamikaze, by the way, not the World War II ones.
I think people get that.
Well, maybe they don't.
Our audience isn't that dumb. But yeah, the storm kamikaze.
Mm-hmm.
So, according to Herodotus, 300 ships were destroyed and 20,000 men were killed in this catastrophic naval loss. And even though you shouldn't take Herodotus at face value, this storm was most likely extremely disruptive.
Right.
Around the same time, there's a Thracian tribe that conducts a night raid on a Persian military camp. And this raid was apparently bad enough for the Persians to conclude their operations for the year. So they got up, they packed their bags and they left.
For a whole year.
For an entire year.
Wow.
Despite the setbacks, though, the Persians, at the very least, had achieved some of their goals by annexing Thrace and reestablishing ties with Macedon. But more importantly, they secured a northern passage for the following campaign that would come 2 years later.
A land bridge?
The land bridge. They have it. It's easier to go up north over Turkey and then through
into mainland Greece.
Into mainland Greece rather than risk
getting spanked by Poseidon again. Yeah.
During this period there's like a 2-year waiting period, and during this waiting period, Darius tried to get the Greek city-states to submit peacefully. It's important to note again that the Persians were not like the Assyrians. So they were not genocidal maniacs. They would lead with the carrot instead of the stick. So they were often just shockingly tolerant to other cultures and religions. And as long as you paid your tribute, and your tribute would be gold and offering up soldiers for the empire, you would be good. The Persians would create satraps, and then these satraps would have local autonomy, but were kind of kept by a web of royal administrators, a lot like how ancient Rome governed it, their empires. The Persians set up the template for a lot of future empires, such as the Romans. But what they did is that they sent ambassadors over to Greece, and the symbolic way of asking for submission is asking for earth and water. You give me earth, wind, and fire. Earth and water. So most Greek city-states, they bent the knee. However, Athens and Eretria, they couldn't, because they had already sponsored the Ionian Revolt. And allegedly, one of the main reasons for the campaign was revenge on Athens and Eretria. So they're like, well, we can't submit to them because they're going to kill us anyway. So when the Persian ambassadors come knocking on their door, they send ambassadors anyway. I don't know what the terms were. I don't know if the terms were just go kill yourself. But they ended up killing.
You definitely didn't want to be one of those ambassadors, one of those royal go-betweens at this time, because a lot of them got fucked.
Yeah, so the ambassadors to both Athens and Eretria were both murdered. And back in the day, I mean, even now, if you kill an ambassador or some type of diplomat, that's usually a pretty big deal.
Yeah,
it's usually
that's
like
akin to war, basically.
Yeah, that is usually akin to war. If you assassinate somebody on a diplomatic trip, usually that means that you are not accepting their terms and giving a fuck you back to the home empire.
It's more than just saying no. It's like, fuck no, you know?
It's like, let's do it right now. Let's do it. Let's do it. You want some of this?
Come at me, bro.
You come at me. You want some of this? Sparta did the same thing. The famous story of tossing the Persian diplomats into a well.
Is that real, actually?
This is Sparta! This is
madness! Is that real for real? Did that actually happen?
Maybe. This is a story that we're told that's used in classical Greek, within classical
fucking
Greek
Herodotus
history. So it's a history that we have. Al Gore invented the internet, right?
It's a system of tubes.
The system of tubes. So the Persians, they finally launched their campaign in 490 BC. But what's strange about this is, something I don't really understand, is that they decide not to take the northern route that they established the last time their last campaign in Europe. They island hop over the Aegean Sea.
Yeah, this is arguably going to be their downfall, really. This is a really bad decision.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that. So we don't really know what the size of this Persian army was. Most historians, they estimate it somewhere between 20,000 to 60,000 men. And I mean, that's a pretty big estimate.
Mm-hmm.
With ancient numbers,
it's a big swing.
It's a big swing. It's a big difference between 20,000 and 60,000 soldiers. And I forgot what Herodotus said. Herodotus says something like in the millions.
Yeah, it's like 10 billion people.
Millions of Persians marching for 2,000 miles. The distance between Greece and Persia is like
10
700
feet.
miles. It's not 2,000 miles. I don't know the exact distance, but it's not.
It's not far.
It's not that far. It is far.
It's far to fucking walk, and it's far to boat on a primitive boat, but grand scheme of things, it's not that big.
It took a long time to get from A to B, though. Come on. The first season of Game of Thrones, it took them like 3 months to get to Winterfell, to King's Landing.
Right.
That's got to be.
And then they were doing it every 15
same
seconds.
Distance.
Yeah. By season 8, they were doing it every 15 minutes. So
yeah, where's the consistency on this? Anyway. So, all right, back to Herodotus. So, yeah, he says something like the millions, an obvious exaggeration. So, this army sweeps across the sea. They take island after island, and then they finally land on the island that has Eritrea, and they sack it. And once they sack it, they make their way down to Athens. And the game plan is to hit Athens in a pincher move. So they land at Marathon and unload some of their army, and then the fleet continues on to the city. In response, the Athenians, they send out a force to bottle up the Persians at their beachhead, where they have the high ground.
Stop! Anakin, I have the high ground. Sorry, I had to.
Oh, that's a great scene. That's a great movie reference. It's over, Anakin.
You underestimate my power.
I'm fighting for democracy.
You are my brother, Anakin. Sorry.
But I think you know probably a little bit more about the Battle of Marathon than I do. Or...
Yeah, totally. So, like you said, they had dropped off a bunch of troops at Marathon, and wanted to kind of circle around to get to the city. But Athens actually got a heads up about this. They knew that they were coming, probably because it took them so long, and they were island hopping, and they got word of it, pretty early on. They knew what was coming. So, again, we don't know very much about the numbers of actual people. What I was reading put Athens outnumbered 2-1. That sounds approximately right, but who knows? But they weren't dumb, right? So they started asking for help. They actually asked Sparta for help. They're one of their main rivals. But at the time, funny enough, they were conveniently having a religious festival, so they passed, at least initially.
No, they were like, we got to wait till the moon's in the right place.
Yeah, so it was like,
sorry.
It was just kind of a joke.
I wish I could use that as an excuse for like everyday life.
Yeah, it's like, you know what, the moon isn't right now. Give me a fortnight. But yeah, so like they were putting out.
Sorry, Mom, I can't visit you. The moon's not right. No, it's fucked up.
Yeah.
It's a joke, Mom.
So like they put out some feelers and they were trying to get some reinforcements, but they knew that, they got a bit of an uphill battle, but they had the high ground, right? So the Athenian strategy was to keep the Persian army pinned down right then and there at the beachhead, with a pincer move of their own, right? Basically trying to block both exits to the plain, right? They wanted to stop that horde at the beaches so that they couldn't pincer the city of Athens, on the other side. But there was a bunch of disadvantages, right? So their disadvantages were that Athens's troops were vulnerable to attack by cavalry, and the Persians had a lot of cavalry, right? But they had sent them on the ships around the other way, right? So all that was there was these just regular foot troops, right? Persian infantry. So they knew that they needed to stop the infantry right then and there because this is the only time that they can actually have an advantage. Basically reinforce this defensive strategy for the Athenians, like hold the line right here and wait out until the moon is good for the Spartans to come and help, as well as some other Greek people. And they also use their geography as an advantage too. So the location that they chose to set up shop, had a bunch of marshes and mountains. I think it was like the southwest had a bunch of mountains and the northeast had a bunch of marshes, and right there on the southeast is where the Persians actually landed and set up shop. So they were able to stick themselves between like a rock and a wet place, so to speak. It was really good, tactical advantage there. And also a couple more things. So the Persian infantry, no, we're talking about infantry, not the cavalry. They were evidently pretty lightly armored, and they weren't really a good match for the Athens troops on like a 1-to-1, like hand-to-hand kind of combat. Athenians, they took up a really good defensive position here at Marathon, and the Persians were a little bit hesitant to attack the Athenians head on, probably because they knew that they didn't have their cavalry around to help them out. Because that's what they were used to. That's the way that they were used to fighting. I'll talk a little bit more in a second about why. Let me not get ahead of myself on the successes and downfalls. Let's see. So they were at this beachhead. The Persians were hesitating a bit. They had set up shop. They set up a fairly wide front line. It was pretty thin, but it was wide enough to hold off the people long enough. And ultimately the time worked in their favor because every day that they waited, that they held them off, it basically let the Spartans, build up the time to get over. And so, at the time, the Athenians had everything to lose by attacking, and all they needed to do is just stick around, just hold the line. That's all. And so in the Battle of Marathon, you kind of see the Athenians defeat Darius's army, and the Persians, they hightailed it back over to Asia Minor. Now, there's a bunch of reasons why the Persians lost, but I think there's probably more reasons why the Greeks succeeded. Again, according to Herodotus, so grain of salt here, the Greeks were probably better equipped. They didn't use bronze upper body armor at the time, but they used leathers and linens. The phalanx formation by the Greeks was really good. You probably can think of how that looks from the 300 movie. And they had a super long tradition in hand-to-hand combat, whereas the Persian infantry, we're talking about infantry here, were accustomed to a different type of conflict. They were normally infantry / bowmen, and that's the style of warfare that they were used to. And that was normally supported by fortifications or siege engines, and definitely helped out and supported by cavalry and chariots. And none of those things were available during the Battle of Marathon. Then there was this pincer move that the Greeks did, which I think might have been accidental. So what ended up happening was, you might remember me saying that the Athenians were probably outnumbered. And so to make their forces wide enough to prevent the Persians from, flanking them and getting around them, they had to make their front line super thin, especially the front center, right? And the Persians pressed on that front center and moved inwards, but their flanks, their outside wings, weren't doing so well, so they bolted, right? They cut and left, they ran, they retreated. So now we've got this center that's pushing forward and the flanks on both sides that are retreating. And then instead of chasing the people who were retreating on the flanks, the Greeks actually pincered the center of the Persian forces, like wholly, kind of accidentally. So that really helped them out a lot, because normally they should have been pursuing them. And then I also hear about like some historians writing about like how they were braver and shit like that. I'm not going to buy into that nonsense. I think a lot of this was accidental, and I think a lot of it was equipment and training and geolocation, the high ground. I think those are probably more reasonable reasons why the Persians won this battle.
I think that most likely the Battle of Marathon was sort of a freak thing.
Yeah, I think it was an accident. It was totally an accident.
Rather than, because we honestly don't really, like, the sources that we're using are the ancient sources. So
right.
We're primarily using Herodotus as a storyteller of this, and he didn't really. He's known as the father of history, but he's also known as the father of lies. So that's the other word. Yeah. So a lot of this could not really be accurate. A lot of historians, they're like, oh yeah, he must have had ancient sources, and it seems like we cross-reference some of these stories, and it seems like some of his information is good, but a lot of his information was used for narrative purposes, right. Like to insert it in the Greek value systems. Like his primary motive was to create a good story. And the Battle of Marathon was like any battle one, it's used as propaganda.
Right.
So a lot of the kind of tropes about the Greeks being braver and the Persians just being like a slave army who their only real strength within their numbers were ways to demonize the enemy, kind of like painting the German Hun during World War I.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. I don't think that was actually the reality, because when you think about it, we're talking about the Hoplites, who were citizen militias versus a professional army.
Right.
So I'm not sure that the Greeks were trained better than the Persians. But let's actually put a pin in that, because I want to dive deeper into that narrative once we get into some of the later battles.
Yep.
And during this second invasion. But Darius, he's so angry that he plans to lead the next invasion of Greece. However, there's this massive revolt in Egypt, which pushes back his plans, and he ends up dying before he gets a chance to lead the army back into this new second invasion of mainland Greece. So when Darius dies, Xerxes
embrace
deal
me
with the unfinished
as your king and as your god. Sorry. I'm sorry. I love the way that they portrayed Xerxes in 300. I think it was just the most just ridiculous. Like, this is so over the top. I think he was like 10 feet tall, and just like dressed ridiculously, looked ridiculous. Everything about him was ridiculous. But for some reason, I was just so like attracted to the idea of Xerxes in that film. And every time I read about like this particular period, I can't get that actor and that look out of my head. Just this ridiculous dude riding on a giant throne that's like being held up by like 1,000 people.
Do you also think of Gerard Butler when you think of a Spartan?
Yeah, I can't not at this point. It's so ingrained in my, in like the lookbook of, the ancients.
What's interesting about 300 is that, well, it's not interesting, but I hate going down this route. Like, I hate when I have to admit that the lefty social justice warriors have a point. I hate it. But I think the portrayal of Persians in the movie 300 is so ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's so, they make them out to be so decadent and
right.
terrible.
Right.
That I'm like, this is kind of I don't want to say racist, but
it's something.
Certainly painting the idea that the Persians were orcs.
Right.
Like,
right.
Like they weren't.
They're having
were
like crazy
orcs
sex parties and shit. You know, like
They were just these decadent Orientals who their best fighters were like literally
fucking
from the ground
ninja
death warriors.
Yeah.
And one Spartan soldier was worth 100 of these dumb slave warriors.
Right.
That was kind of like the overall messaging.
I mean, Herodotus would have a fucking boner like watching that movie. Like this was like pretty much playing right into how he described the events, at least stylistically.
Yeah. Herodotus probably would have proved that movie. But Herodotus wasn't so. That narrative of the Persians being super decadent doesn't come from the ancient historians. It comes from the classical historians more so in the early 20th century, 19th century, the first writers of ancient Greece in a modern context. And Herodotus actually gives them props when props are due, and so do other historians, not from that time period, but from centuries later, like Plutarch gives them props. But this second invasion of Greece, it's modern historians, again, this varies. It's varies between 80,000 to 200,000 soldiers. The second
again
invasion,
a huge swing,
which is a big swing. And the Greek claim from Herodotus is that it's millions. This is where you get the claims that this is a sea of men marching, and there is evidence that this was a really big force. So the Persians constructed a pontoon bridge across the Hellespont. So that's the Dardanelles Strait that goes to Turkey into mainland Europe. They have to create a bridge so the troops can walk across, and then they also carve a canal through Mount Athos.
Is that real?
Yeah, it's real. Like that's a real. They really did do that, because you can't see it now, but you can see it from like an aerial picture that there was a canal there, and it's over a mile long.
That's impressive.
It was a pretty impressive accomplishment in engineering at that time. The reason why they build that canal is because Xerxes doesn't want to have the same issues over at Mount Athos, because that's where the sea that's where his father's fleet was destroyed in one of the first campaigns against Greece, right
Poseidon.
after the Ionian Revolt. So he was, he was like, I don't want to deal with that. So that's why they carve a canal through there.
Yeah.
And like the claim that Herodotus says it was just like a sense of ego. Xerxes is kind of painted as by the ancient historians as pretty bad. Like they paint Cyrus the Great as very noble, and they also they paint Darius as like super savvy and smart and quick, and they paint Xerxes as the king that lost his way. The end of like the great king, the king of kings. Like this was the decadent king who ultimately led the Persian Empire to its doom.
10-foot tall, bald, and a whole lot of piercings, right?
And it's kind of like this romantic vision that idolizes both Persian and Greek ideals at the same time. But they use Xerxes as this symbol of just complete decadence. And I think they actually kind of captured that in the movie 300.
Yeah. That's what
though
they were going for.
The ancient historians didn't as much like make the soldiers out to be orcs.
Right. That was a stretch too far, I think. Yeah.
But yeah. So the second invasion, this army marches through Greece, and they don't really see any resistance until Thermopylae. And we all know the story here, and I think we're gonna do a separate episode on Thermopylae at a later time. So we'll skip all the theatrics, but anyone who's seen those chiseled abs in 300, that a team of historians at Oxford University have agreed that their abs probably were that chiseled. So we're going to have to take the experts' words for it.
Yeah.
but they roll through. They roll through Sparta. Ultimately, they roll through Sparta. That's probably what happened.
Right.
They rolled through Sparta, and it was a minor speed bump.
Right.
This force of 300 Spartans, and there were other Greeks there too.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just 300 Spartans. It was a minor speed bump, and then they went marching down Greece until they hit Athens. And when they hit Athens, they burned Athens to the ground. Meanwhile, roughly the 30 remaining allied Greek city-states and the Greeks who flee Athens, they establish a new defensive position. And this is the Battle of Salamis. So the next big clash would be a naval battle where roughly 380 Greek ships faced off against 500 Persian ships. And the Greeks, they're able to pull this off because they funnel the Persian ships into a strait, causing their greater numbers to be a disadvantage.
Right.
And because they were in such a tight space, the ships started crashing into each other. Meanwhile, the Greek ships, they were stationary, and they were able to pick their moment to engage. And they ultimately win because of this. And after this, Xerxes goes home. And, I mean, you could paint it as a sign of defeat, but most likely he went home is because part of the mission was done. They did burn down Athens.
Right. That's what they set out to do.
One of the campaigns was to punish Eritrea and Athens. So
they got them.
Something. It's another thing off their checklist. They burn down Athens. But when he leaves, and he probably had more important shit to do, because we don't really know how the Persians looked at the Greeks, because Alexander the Great destroyed a lot of the Persian records. He burnt down their capital and destroyed a lot of their archives. So we don't know we don't really know the Persian side of the story. We're always taking the Greek side of the story. You know, if you look at the conflicting narratives about World War I, you can paint anyone as the bad guy according to selective cherry-picked sources.
Right.
You know, you can make a case for every single one of those powers in World War I to be like the major instigator of that war. Here, we're just left with just the Greek narrative and the Greek narrative only.
Right.
Maybe the Persians just saw the Greeks as some freak sideshow they didn't really care too much about. And these were just minor expeditionary forces to deal with any rebelling city-state or territory.
Mm-hmm.
There's no proof that the Persians saw this as some uber important regent to dominate and to bring into their empire, because most of the Near East empires, they saw all the wealth towards the east, so towards the Indus, rather than looking at, thinking at the west, thinking of the west. Now, when he goes back, Xerxes goes back, he leaves Mardonius in charge, and General Mardonius, he tries to start politicking again. So he tries to get the Greek city-states to fight each other. When that doesn't work, they actually sack Athens again. And what this prompts is the allied Greeks to rally together and then take the offensive. And this confrontation takes place at Plataea. And during this battle, Mardonius is killed, and the Greeks end up effectively winning the war. So the question is, how did this juggernaut get taken down by a bunch of stupid Greek city-states?
Right. Non-unified at that, Greek city-states.
So I think it's really important to highlight again, like, the problem and the challenges when painting a narrative like this of using ancient sources. The Persian Wars are part of Greek identity. It's not only part of Greek identity, but it's part of just the Western tradition.
Identity. Yeah.
A Western tradition. You'll see a lot of like Victor David Hansen. He's like a very famous classical historian who specializes in ancient Greece. He's also like a conservative pundit who works at the Hoover Institute. You get a lot of those types in this field. There are a lot of those kind of heritage foundation types who are like, oh, the Greek way of war. That's just something that you probably heard, like the Western way of war or the Greek way of war, where, they start talking about the Eastern way of war, which is just a bunch of dancing pansies running around shooting arrows and running away. Yeah. And then the Greek way of war, which is you get your shields up and your spears up and you march in formation and go right into that enemy right there. That's what our ideal is, the Greek way.
I kind of like your explanation of the bunch of pansies shooting arrows and running away, because that's super on brand for like the reality.
I mean, it's on brand for the reality, but it's also effective at that
worked.
Time to do that.
They conquered like a lot of territory doing that. So,
but let's talk about. I keep on say his name 3 times: Herodotus, but you have to rely on his sources. There are 3 narrative accounts for this battle of Plataea. One being Herodotus, which his sources are biased. In addition to him, we have other historians who are summarizing him essentially. So guys like Diodorus and Plutarch, who are other Greek historians, they come in a later generation, and what they're doing, they're summarizing a lot of his work, sourcing Herodotus,
right? And we're further summarizing him. So like, following in Plutarch's footsteps here, right?
According to Herodotus, the Persians fielded, and this is at the Battle of Plataea, 350,000 troops. The Greeks, they fielded just over 100,000 troops. The Persians divided their units by nationality. So they would have their Indian troops, their African troops, their Medes, their whatever. They were governing over dozens, if not hundreds, of different linguistic cultures. Mm-hmm. So they had a lot to pull from. But the numbers that I get from a website called ancient.eu are the way that this was constructed. The Persians, parentheses, it says best troops, 40,000. Medes, 20,000. The Bactrians, the Indians, and the Sakai, 20,000. And then the pro-Persian Greeks, 50,000. And that's an important part that we didn't even mention. There was a lot of pro-Persian Greeks in the Persian army.
The ones that bent the knee.
The ones that bent the knee or had favorable ties, or maybe were just mercenaries. The Greek army was led by Pausanias, and he is the nephew of King Leonidas. And according to Herodotus, the Greek Hoplite forces were from 23 different city-states, with the 3 major contributors being Sparta, Athens, and Corinth. They are contributing the most troops. Now, I want to take some stabs at your earlier narrative about the Persians, the Greeks most likely having better armor or just better equipment.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So,
traditional Persian infantry tactics, they involved a formation of 10 ranks deep, which only the first rank created a shield wall. The Persians behind them would start launching arrows.
Right. That's the infantry archer regiments.
Yeah. So after the enemy was weakened, the guys in the back, they would start acting as heavy infantry when they would eventually clash. The Greeks were actually less organized. So each hoplite, they carried their own shield, and they would, in a lot of cases, they would be forced to huddle behind the big aspis shield. You know, the shield that you always see that
stands on the ground, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They would huddle behind an aspis shield of another Greek for protection, but I don't think it's likely to believe that each one of these hoplites had their own aspis shield. Herodotus also says that the Persians were handicapped in close quarter fighting because their spears were shorter than those wielded by the Greeks. The issue is that the length of these spears most likely wasn't fixed. So if you go back,
just really depends on who's supplying them, really, you know.
What do you think the chances are that all of these spears are the same height by category?
For the Greeks, actually for both sides, they're not going to be standard in general, because, you know, for the Greeks, it's like a conglomeration of 23 city-states. Each of them have their own traditions of you know, creating armaments, and they'd often fight each other, right? So it's unlikely to think that they're all using the same equipment. And then on the Persian side, you know, they dominated a bunch of, you know, different ethnic groups, and then forced them to, you know, into forced conscription, you know, or like send us a bunch of troops and you're good. And so each of those cultures are probably also building their own sets of equipment. So no, like they're not going to have the same thing. You're absolutely right. All the spears are going to be of different sizes, lengths, you know, versatility, things like that.
And the dory spear, which is like the spear that we think of when we think of the Greek hoplite, that really long spear.
Mm-hmm.
I read from a source, and forgive me for not remembering the source because I just read it a couple days ago. They didn't become standard until after the Persian War.
Oh, that's interesting.
Basically, the conclusion was that it was kind of a mixed bag as far as what the Greeks were supplied with. I just want to pull up this source because I don't like not giving people credit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, while you do that, I mean, what I can say is that I think I agree pretty well with the argument on the spears. I think that there were probably a lot of different armaments on both sides of the battlefield, and in my opinion, I think that's not necessarily the issue. When some of the sources I've looked at, they were mostly pointing out the fact that the Persian infantry worked best when they were supported by fortifications, or when they were supported by chariots and you know, cavalry, which they didn't have available in many of the battles that they fought against the Greeks. That really put them at a big disadvantage.
I found the source. It's by Roel Konejnejik.
Yeah,
I did the best I can on that one.
Okay.
But yeah, according to him, it was that spear wasn't used until later on.
That's interesting.
Or at least wasn't standardized until later on. But yeah, one of the big major themes is that the Greeks were able to win Plataea because the Persians couldn't fight at close range. They relied way too much on light infantry and archers. And Herodotus says, I have the quote up, what hurt them the most was that their outfits lacked armor.
Mm-hmm.
They fight like naked men.
Yeah, that's bullshit. The naked part was totally bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is that this contradicts other statements that he had already said about the Persians.
Mm-hmm.
So when describing the immortals, so this is like they're good infantry. They're really good soldiers. They wear cuirass made of iron scales and carry gira, large wicker shields. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm no expert on ancient armor, but
sounds pretty good to me.
I'm wondering if you can compare that to the Greek armor, or if there's at least some comparison. The question is, why did Herodotus bring that as part of his narrative? Like, why was that? Like, oh, they lacked armor. What a historian is probably going to point out, like a modern day historian who is looking at these stories as a little bit more favorable than we're trying to, is that they're going to say something like, well, the armor was only for the elite troops, not the regular rank and file.
It's probably
but that
true,
assumes,
right? which
is a fair point. But then you'd have to apply that same logic
to the Greeks.
Greek hoplites.
Exactly.
If the Persians aren't uniformly stacked with armor, what would make you think that these divided city-states were uniformly stacked with armor?
It's the same argument for the spears. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So it's the same argument. And according to a lot of these sources, the only thing that the Persians didn't have that the Greeks had were the shin guards. So that most likely wasn't a life-changing thing, especially if you're not riding a horse, not having the cuirass. Wouldn't be like a life or death thing. Like, oh no, I got to go run back and grab my shin guards.
God forbid they hit me in the shins. That would hurt a lot.
I mean, if you forget your shield, then that's a big problem. Right. But so it was unlikely that it was unlikely that these were all that each Greek soldier had this uniform armor.
No,
I just don't buy that narrative that the Greeks were these cohesive units that thought as one and acted as one and were all just standardized with this equipment that made them basically invincible to these Persians with their weak little spears and their stupid dumb arrows.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to speculate on a lot of these narratives about the differences in the equipment. What's interesting is that Plutarch, Plutarch comes around 400 years later, at the very least 400 years after the war, the Greco-Persian Wars. He's offended by Herodotus, saying that you can't say that the Persians fought naked because then that discredits the Spartan victory.
Right.
So, what are you doing saying that they were so unarmed? That hurts the narrative of Greek supremacy.
Mm-hmm. It's like, of course they were going to win if they were all just running around with their dicks hanging out,
Yeah. You can't say that during the Iraq War we just bombed a bunch of school children.
Well, you can say that.
That's kind of what happened.
Well, you can say that.
You can't say that during the war in Afghanistan we just killed a bunch of goat farmers. Well, that's kind of what happened.
You can also
but you can't say it.
Exactly.
So the way that this battle's kind of painted is that, again, the Persians were a combination of effeminate archers and slaves, that their only value was being a slave and having more slaves than you had free Greek Hoplites, and that was their major advantage fighting you. And these Greek Hoplites were just so disciplined and so strong. The Western way of war sounds like a very neoconservative type thing, and I'm pretty sure I've seen neoconservatives talk about this at length. So that's how you know that it's. I'm pretty sure I've seen a lot of stuff about Robert Kagan write a lot about this, and anytime you see a neoconservative endorse an idea, it's probably some type of fantastic view on history. It's some weird way to mytholize. That's not a good word. I'm trying to think of to
fantasize, perhaps.
Fantasize about these and fetishize.
Fetishize is a good one too.
Fetishize these ancient battles because you can use that as part of your worldview as for Western supremacy. Man, I'm not liking how I'm talking like a leftist right now, but sometimes I just can't help it.
It works for this.
It works. I mean, sometimes they're right.
Yeah.
So the other thing is that I had mentioned that Herodotus, he himself says that the Persians they lacked strength nor courage.
They neither lacked strength nor courage. Right.
He respected them. In reality, I'm sure the Greek commanders at the time respected them as well and knew how risky it was to have a pitched battle with the Persians. At that point, the only victory they had was at Marathon,
which might have been an accident.
Which who the hell knows what happened?
Right.
So General Mardonius, he was a seasoned general and he had a battle-hardened professional army. Mardonius actually had challenged the Spartans to a one-on-one match So he basically
trial
said,
by combat.
like, hey, I'll bring my best 1,000 guys and you bring your best 1,000 guys and we'll duke it out at this planned place. And there's no need to have this big war. Just, you bring your guys, I bring my guys, same numbers. Let's do it. I'm not sure about the numbers, the 1,000 guys, but it was something along those lines. And the Spartans said no. They're like, no, we're not doing that. Man for man, the best Greek fighters of that time may have not considered themselves better than the Persian equivalents.
Maybe.
And besides the Spartans, the average Greek soldier who was fighting in the Persian War was most likely an amateur.
Militiamen.
They were militiamen. They had limited training. These weren't professional armies from the Roman Empire. These were farmers, artisans,
dudes,
mostly farmers, shopkeepers, just like local landowners. One of the reasons why there is an increase in hoplites during this era is because prior to the war, there was a lot of land reforming that limited the power of oligarchs in Greece and gave more access to land to more people. And you needed land to have the right to fight in the army. You needed that there's that barrier to entry to enter the armed forces. It's kind of funny because back in like the ancient world, and like you see this in Rome and Greece, there's a barrier to entry to join the army. Like you have to be like a landowner. Now the army just recruits the poorest people in the country to join.
Right.
Just come and be a soldier.
It's like, if anything, we want you to have a lot of debt. Right?
Come on, kid. Don't you want to see the world?
Don't you want free health care? Every country. Free education?
Free education.
Free health care.
You get the chance to fight for Uncle Sam, earn a living, and maybe you kill a couple of goat farmers.
That's dark.
Yeah, well, we can't stray too much from our origins.
Yeah.
So, in reality, like the hoplite formation could have been more of a crowd of soldiers than like some type of heavy formation. In addition, you have to take into account that the Greeks had no cavalry. Yep. And the Persians did.
Yep.
Greece is not southern Greece is not exactly a place where horses are ground. Where horses are bred.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of mountains, a lot of beaches, a lot of marshes. It's not like great horse territory. It's not like a grassy steppe,
The grassy knoll.
Yeah, it's not that. That's not what it is.
One of the reasons why Philip II is able to revolutionize Macedon and just make this like juggernaut army that conquers the entire known world. Philip II is Alexander the Great's dad, who basically Alexander the Great inherited his army from him. It's because up north in Macedon, it's removed from the city states, and it's a lot less. There's a lot more grassland and a lot less mountains, so they were able to introduce cavalry to an already kind of mature
army,
phalanx, and mature type, mature professional soldier class. Mm-hmm. And what they had up in Macedon, Philip was a hostage in Thrace. No, not in Thrace, in Thebes. He was a hostage in Thebes, and he had learned like all the ancient tactics, because Thebes was kind of rivaling Sparta at that time. This is later, not during this time. This is probably about 50, 60 years later. Thebes was like a rival to Sparta when it came to just military power, and Philip II learned from them, and then he combined that with like using cavalry, and that's how they created the army that conquered pretty much everything in its path. However, I digress too much. So a phalanx would probably hold up against a cavalry charge, but horse archers would probably wear them down. Mm. And I understand that arrows are way less ineffective against the phalanx, but because the arrows have to penetrate way too many things for them to hit their target.
Right,
right. like not only you can hit the spear on top, you can hit the shield, you can hit the obviously armor. So it's hard. It would be hard, but you have to think after a fucking sea of arrows that some of them hit.
Right, and they do it multiple times. Right.
If you're just launching nonstop arrows, I mean, how?
There's only so long you can hold your shield above your head, you know.
And reading Herodotus, he even says how when the Spartans are under this barrage, they're suffering and they're having a real bad time. And he talks about them. I think they're like looking for oracle signs and things like that to get out of it. So it's a whole bunch of stuff like that. Most likely, in going through this, the question still becomes, so with all this, like, if there wasn't some major advantage on the Greek side as far as their tactics and their soldier class and their armor, so how the hell did they win, especially if they didn't have the higher numbers? I think most likely their numbers were evenly matched,
or at least closer to even than what we are led to believe,
or closer to even than people like to believe. Some historians go as far to say that the Greeks could have outnumbered the Persian troops, because when you talk about the massive Persian army of millions, we're talking about an army that it's not fielded all together. It's spread out across the rest of their empire. Right. Their empire is large. So it's out doing other things besides, fighting over some fucking city-states in Greece.
Right. And we're still not, the jury's not still out about whether, how seriously, Persia actually wanted to conquer Greece, or if they just had a little grudge that they needed to take care of either, which is what we mentioned before. So we're not even sure exactly how committed they were or how many people they committed to it.
Well, to take this back a bit, so when Mardonius, when he challenged the Spartans to this all-star match thing with a predetermined amount of troops, right. And the Spartans said no, maybe Mardonius, the reason why he said that is because secretly he was worried about the Greek numbers. So this is just speculation, but you just have to grant this possibility. Maybe he was concerned that the Greeks outnumber them, so he was like, "Oh, maybe they think I have a larger army. In reality, we're probably a little bit more even than they think. I'm more confident in my own soldiers' abilities against the Spartans than I do in an open pitched battle where I don't know where anything can happen.
Right.
This way, I can pick the terrain and all, and we can agree upon the terrain, and I can pick my best guys and make sure that nothing out of the ordinary happens." He seemed to be more confident doing that. So who knows? This is all complete speculation, just based off some of the reports and some of the sources and stories and myth that come out of this very epic story. But whatever led the Greeks to victory at this battle, and this was the deciding factor. I think there's no doubt that at the very least their stubbornness to surrender and their unbreakable will led to them the winning, because they had to have had an unbreakable will to not have lost that. And the way they actually win is that some Spartan throws a rock at Mardonius and he kills him. He throws a rock at his head. So he gets up to the line, and it could have been out of complete desperation. He gets up, wham, he's down. And then in battles like that in the old days, you kill your general, a lot of times the morale just drops throughout the rest of the army. So that could have been very likely. But when you think about it, after the war and the Persians go home, and there's another battle too, but this is the major battle to wrap things up, that wrap up the Persian threat in Greece. The Persians go back and they thrive for another 100 years, and what they decide to do, instead of fighting the Greeks, they just use them as proxies. Meaning that they start, because after this temporary unity that happens in Greece between mainly Athens and Sparta, they fight.
Right.
They go to war with each other.
Back to infighting. Right.
It's back to infighting, and way more Greeks died in the Peloponnesian Wars than they did in the Greco-Persian Wars. Right. It was a way more destructive conflict, and it was just way bloodier. It was worse. The Persians would finance mostly Sparta to fight Athens, and then vice versa. They would fund both sides of it. So I guess they had learned, like, why send troops over here? We can just, like, fund whatever army fits our geopolitical interests at this time. And it's kind of funny that the Spartans are always seen as like, oh, we like, look at Sparta. Their unbreakable will, they'll never bend to the Persians. Well, a lot of these Spartans, they became mercenaries, right, or they were financed by the Persians after the war.
Spartan campaign finance reform, they needed it, man, because they were taking a lot of donations from the Persian. But that's
so yeah,
that's that.
Foreign lobbies, was fucking that Iranian lobby, way too much influence over Congress.
Yeah.
I guess we're wrapping things up because we're at almost an hour and 30 minutes or so. Do you even want to attempt to talk about the politics, or
I got one thing after talking about all of this. So we asked the question, how were the Greeks able to win? And we were just like, there's like, it seems unfeasible, right? And now, as obviously what's going on, where we've got a number of Trump supporters who just recently sieged the Capitol building, we got to ask ourselves, how the fuck were they able to break into the Capitol building? Like, we've been spending billions of dollars on our professional army, and we've been, arming our police to act as quasi soldiers for basically ever. But, just a couple of probably not very stable folks just walk in, break a couple windows, go in, take a shit on Nancy Pelosi's desk. Like, how the fuck were they able to do that? Just walk in,
So the number one takeaway that I've gotten from this is that it has made liberals use the language that you would hear someone in the villain in Star Wars use, like, these are rebels, this is an insurrection, yeah, destroy the rebels. Yeah. I've never, and my girlfriend listens to some Instagram chick who's not even in politics, she's not a political Instagrammer, but she was like, this is an insurrection in our state, they're breaking away from the Union, the rebels must be quashed. Yeah. And I was just like, what? This sounds like who's the general in the admiral in Star Wars?
It's like Grand Moff Gideon or some shit like that,
She sounded like him.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of these people are mentally unstable who broke in. I didn't want to dive too deep into this political thing because I've been trying to take a break from politics. Some things just grab your attention. However, just always remember that once things get violent, things have a tendency to go really wrong. So you should always try to avoid that
at all costs. Yeah.
Because once things hit a violent level, usually there's no way to go back, or things just can spiral completely out of control. So just don't do anything stupid.
Yep.
But yeah, anything else?
Nope.
All right. Well, thanks guys for listening to another episode of Bro History. We always appreciate it when you join us and give us a listen. Make sure that you rate and review the podcast. That is the number one way to help us grow. So if you're on Apple, just go up to that star thingy, press the 5-star button, and then give us a nice little review. Say, hey, I love your podcast. You guys are both great, and I can tell by your voice that you're both very handsome. That just asking for that type of review.
Yep.
So if you can go ahead and do that. We also have a Patreon. With the Patreon account, you can support the show, and you'll also get access to our Slack account, where we chat about stuff and shoot ideas and shoot the shit. We have a YouTube channel as well, Bro History at YouTube. YouTube Bro History. Excuse me. It's 12 at night, so
we're getting there.
Usually around this time, I sound like a little more incoherent than usual. So I guess we'll just wrap this one up. But let us know what you think. Appreciate it, and peace.
Peace.